Welcome back to the Cody For Natick podcast. It's the only podcast produced by the committee to elect Cody Jacobs to the Natick Select Board of Natick, Massachusetts. That's our committee name, and we're sticking to it today. Our special guest today is no surprise to any of you. It is Cody Jacobs, who is here with us today. How are you, Cody?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I am hopeful that our children who are home on our snow day today, we're filming this on January 7th. I'm hopeful that they will, if they decide to join us because they're children, that they contribute something productive to the conversation. Shall we put it that way? So that should be fun. But they are home safe and all is well.
They will.
So thanks for asking.
They will.
Yeah. All right. Today we're talking about climate change and environmental protection. Very excited to talk about this very important issue for all of us in the community. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I think that the first thing that folks who are listening today may be curious about is exactly what town government has to do with climate change and environmental protection. So I would love it if we could kick it off with you just kind of talking about that a little bit.
Well, so it's interesting, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I think with climate change, we tend to think of that as a national political issue or even an international issue that needs to be dealt with on the world stage. And it definitely does, right? I mean, it's, to actually do something about climate change, we all hope that there'll be more action nationally and internationally. But there's actually a lot we can do locally about climate change. Natick actually has a formally adopted plan to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and it has some good goals for us to work towards as a community that we can be working on right now. And in fact, the select board has a lot of control over how quickly we reach those goals. I think for a lot of people, 2050 seems a little bit too far away. With the pace of climate change. And, I think if we want to really be a leader on these issues, we can do a lot to kind of accelerate our lesser dependence on fossil fuels and, a more renewable lifestyle here in Natick. So we can do a lot. And we really have an opportunity to lead.
Makes sense. One thing that I know that came to mind as we were talking about this is our local parks and our trails. I know there's been a lot of talk about, like, for example, the waste situation. As many of you know, we don't have trash cans in our parks and on some of our trails. And so I feel like that this is an issue that's important to this topic. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the carry in, carry out trash policy that we currently have in many of our parks and trails here in Natick.
Yeah, so it's not definitely not all, but some of our some of our parks and some of our trails have definitely had issues with pollution, with litter. A lot of plastic pollution, unfortunately, which can get into our waterways and causes a lot of problems. And it's just unfortunate, right? I mean, that's one of the best things about Natick. That's one of the things I love the most about being here is just our open spaces and how many ways there are to connect with nature. And certainly as a parent of young children, like we go to a lot of the playgrounds all the time. John Jay Lane in West Natick. We go to Navy Yard a lot. Great playgrounds here. But one thing that's been an issue that a lot of people have noticed is that trash gets left there. And of course, on one level, that's an issue of personal responsibility. People should not be leaving trash at parks, right? That's terrible. But at the same time, I think there is a role here for government in the sense that we could have municipally maintained trash cans in those parks or recycling bins or both, and we don't right now in Natick. And the reason is that we have sort of this carry in, carry out policy. This idea that everything you bring, you'll bring home with you. And while that's good in theory, that isn't how it's worked out in practice. It's led to people leaving trash at these parks. And I think that while obviously there is a cost involved in workers from DPW would have to maintain trash cans that we put into parks. But I don't, on the other hand, I feel like that's, kind of a core function of our government is to do something like keep our parks clean. That's part of what makes it a nice, like, safe place to play for our kids. It also, again, like, contributes to our impact on the ecosystem, like how much trash we're putting out there. It's not a silver bullet. Obviously, people would still have to throw the trash into the bins if it was there. So there's still, like I said, this is not just a government issue. This is an issue of personal responsibility. But I do think that this is a place where we should look at. I think it's a policy that I would like to see looked at, to see maybe adjusted to have more trash cans available.
And to what degree would the select board have the power and or responsibility to make changes in this regard?
Well, so the select board, in consultation with DPW and with the town administrator, I think would have the ability to make that change, right? That would be an issue of town policy. So it's not something that would have to, like, go through town meeting or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it is a change that the select board could make. I mean, you'd certainly want to be in consultation with DPW and with the town administrator on what that would mean in terms of like, budgetarily wise, because, right, the select board can set the policy, but they can't pay for the policy, right? That the budget has to go through town meeting ultimately. So I think it would have to be something where the first step would be kind of figuring out, okay, what would this cost? Are there certain parks that or trails that we should prioritize, et cetera? And then kind of, going from there and figuring out what the next steps would be in terms of the select board setting a policy and making sure that that's provided for budgetarily.
Makes sense. And for our listeners who have questions about the town meeting process, I would encourage you to check out our website, codyfornatick.com, in which we've already done a deep dive into how town meeting works. And so there's additional information there. Encourage y'all to check that out. That makes sense. Appreciate you clarifying that. I do want to shift gears a little bit now and talk about Natick's energy program. I know that I've lived in Natick for, what would this be, a year and a half. And so I have recently started to take a deeper dive into my power bill and better understanding where our energy comes from. And I stumbled across this community choice aggregation program that, honestly, I didn't fully understand. So I was hoping, Cody, if you could take a few moments and explain what the community choice aggregation program is and how it impacts Natick residents.
Sure. Yeah. So the community choice aggregation program, basically, it means that our community and many municipalities across Massachusetts have the option and do negotiate power rates in bulk from utilities. So in other words, for businesses and residents of Natick, the town, and this is one of the things that the select board has control over, negotiates contracts with utilities for a certain period of time, like 2 or 3 years, in which they will provide power to our residents and businesses for sort of a set rate. And the advantage of this, hopefully, should be obvious, right? We're negotiating in bulk as a group, so there's much more bargaining power for a municipality to negotiate electricity rates than, say, an individual would have. And so this allows us to save consumers money. And so right now, like you'll see on your electricity bill, you're kind of automatically enrolled in this community aggregation program. It's kind of by the default, and most people choose to remain in it, even though you can opt out and individually purchase from the Eversource, from the electricity utility. But most people choose to remain in it, and for good reason, because it usually saves the consumer money. So it's a good program, and but one of the other things that it does is it allows us to have significant leverage over the mix of electricity that we get in Natick. In other words, the mix that is from renewable energy and non-renewable energy. And in the Natick, the net zero plan, it talks about how this is a key component in moving us towards net zero in every few years when we negotiate that contract, which, by the way, I believe that the contract is going to be up for negotiation this year. So that's something that the select board will have a say in.
Cody, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you explain net zero for our listeners?
Sure. So yeah, net zero just means getting us to zero carbon emissions in Natick. So net zero just means that we are either we're not producing any new carbon into the atmosphere overall. Now, some of that can be, there's carbon offsets and things like that, where like maybe you are, using a little bit of carbon, but you're not, you're not on the net using carbon, right? That's the net part of net zero. And so there's this plan that we have in place to try to get there by 2050. That involves doing many different things across Natick, not just with our electrical supply, but a lot of it starts there, right? Because a lot of our carbon emissions that aren't from things like vehicles are coming from our use of electricity. So the select board's control over the aggregation program is an opportunity to move us in that direction by requiring a larger mix of the electricity that we get in the aggregation program to come from renewable energy.
Can you talk, if you have this knowledge, a little bit about precisely what the mix looks like right now and where, in your opinion, it should be in the short term, medium term, long term? I know you've touched on this a little bit, but some specifics would be great if you have them.
Well, so right now through the aggregation program, the amount that is from renewable energy is in the mid 50s. So I believe it's about 55%, give or take. And the as far as where we should be, I mean, the select board had sort of had a goal of increasing that percentage by about 3% each year. With a goal of obviously moving us towards 100 at some point. And I think that's a good goal. And I'm glad to see that. I wonder if we can push it a little bit further, a little bit faster. I think that's something that I would, definitely have questions about to see if that's feasible, just from an economic perspective. Because the thing is, since people have the opportunity to opt out of the aggregation program, we don't want to make it too expensive where people do take advantage of the opt out, and then we're kind of defeating the purpose of increasing the mix of renewables. But I do think, looking into if we can get a slightly higher number, if that's a possibility, I think that would be good, because that's such a major source of our emissions right now.
That's helpful. All right. So my last question is a pretty straightforward one. As a select board member, are there any other actions, or perhaps we can summarize what we just talked about? Are there any other direct actions you'd advocate for to take action locally to reduce things like carbon pollution, improve our carbon footprint, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I think there's several things we can do. So one thing is that, one of the major emitters of carbon in Natick is Natick town government. And there are steps we can take to improve upon that. And starting with where we get our electricity from. So I was talking about the community aggregation program's electricity mix, but then there's a separate question of what the electricity mix is we get, because we being the town, the municipality. So the town itself, like to power the schools, to power our municipal buildings and all that, has a separate contract with the utility company where we get our power from. And that contract is also up for renewal in 2022, late 2022, I believe. And the select board will have the power to negotiate the next contract and decide how much of our electricity should come from renewable energy. If I'm elected, I would push for 100%. I think that we're, I would, or as close to that as we can possibly get. We're not there right now. And I think that we can be. I think we have the opportunity to. If you look in the net zero plan, like they point out that they've actually surveyed community members about this, and they think that it's worth paying a little extra. Again, it would have to come from the municipality, so it'd be spread out over taxpayers. But in order to move us to lesser emissions on from the municipal side. So that's one huge thing we can do that the select board will have very direct control over. But there's other things we can do as well. So when we're procuring new vehicles and stuff like that for the police department, for the fire department, for DPW, we can look into making sure that we get low emission, zero emission vehicles, electric vehicles, so where possible. Now, some of those specialized vehicles aren't available in an electrified form yet, but there's still ways to make that a priority in everything that we do. And municipal buildings as well. So, when we're designing new buildings, or when we're, or even when we're rehabbing old buildings, there's a lot of talk about what's going to happen to the Johnson School building. When we're thinking about doing these changes to municipal buildings, we can think about making them carbon neutral buildings, right? In the way that they're designed, and in the mix of electricity that they're able to use. So I think there's a lot that we can do from municipal perspective. And finally, the last thing I would mention is transportation policy and development policy, which has a huge impact on sustainability. Again, not all of these things are 100% within the control of the select board, but the select board is a major platform where we can push for policy that makes sense in those areas. So that means development that's closer to public transportation, closer to the train stations. That means, supporting transportation projects that make the town more walkable, right? Like more, better sidewalks. There's a lot of places here it's not very safe to walk or bike. And so, we can improve our town that way, where people are taking fewer trips in their cars. Because again, going back to the net zero plan, if you look at it, a lot of our emissions are coming from people going places in their cars. None of this is going to change overnight. A lot of it is regional or national, but there are a lot of things we can do here locally, and including through the select board.
Awesome. Appreciate the detail there. And thanks again, Cody, for taking the time to explain, honestly, a pretty complicated issue. I appreciate you sharing your perspective with our listeners. That's all we've got for today on climate change and environmental protection. Tune in next time for another exciting episode of the Cody For Natick podcast. We'll talk to all of you again real soon. Thanks, everyone. Consumes, and where do you think we should be in, I guess, the short term, medium term?